Hello, my name is David Baldinger, and I'm here representing the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations, an affiliation of more than 70 diverse grassroots taxpayer groups that support school property tax elimination. We're going to talk about that today. I'm going to start you off with a few numbers. $24 billion. That's the total cost of K-12 education in Pennsylvania today. 6.25% is the average annual rate of increase in that cost. If you use those numbers as a constant and extend it out for 10 years, you'll find the total cost of education in Pennsylvania balloons to $44 billion. This is totally unsustainable. Every year I pay my April property tax bill at the end of the rebate period, so I have a chance to speak with our local tax collector, who is very friendly and is only too willing to help with this. In fact, she said she's going to be out of a job if this bill ever passes, but she doesn't care because she thinks it's the right thing to do. This year, she told me, there's been a sharp increase in people who have not been able to pay the April bill, which is the smaller of the two bills. She's concerned about how people are ever going to be able to pay the July bill, which is the school property tax, if they haven't been able to afford the April bill. She said more people than ever have gone on the payment plan this year, which is unusual. She said a lot of people have complained to her, too, about taking out reverse mortgages to be able to pay their property tax bill. Now, to me, this is unconscionable. You work all your life to be secure in your home, and then you have to remortgage the house in your golden years just to be able to afford to pay your rent to the government. She also said she's seen more and more assessment appeals as people are trying to reduce their taxes by changing their property assessments. Here's another number for you. 30% is the number you can expect your property taxes to rise by in the next 3 or 4 years. Due to the pension crisis, if you're not aware of it, look it up. Increased pensions, underpayments to the pension fund for a dozen or more years, and the pullback in the stock market has left the teachers' pension fund and the legislators' pension fund in Pennsylvania underfunded. That's going to have to be made up by local property taxpayers, and you could see a huge increase in your property tax over the next few years. And one final number for you, 10,000. That always stuns people when I bring it up, and I'm going to give you an example here right in front of me. This is from the Reading Eagle newspaper. It's not unusual. There's about 1,100 properties listed for tax sale, and these are not foreclosures. These are property tax sales due to non-payment of property taxes, 1,100 there in one county alone. Multiply that by 67 counties, you're looking at about 10,000 homes each year that are sold to sheriff sale in Pennsylvania. People evicted from their homes simply because they can't pay their property taxes. Now, the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which our office holders are sworn to uphold, guarantees that we will be secure in our property. Yet the politicians who took this oath will allow our homes to be forcibly taken from us if we don't pay our rent to the government in the form of property taxes. So what we're talking about today is not so much property tax reform as education finance reform, and that's the problem. Myth number one is that property taxes are the problem. No, property taxes are not the problem. They're just a symptom of a greater problem. What are the real problems? Well, first of all, an antiquated taxation system that's not based on accepted taxation principles. The idea of the property tax dates back to the Middle Ages, when landowners were the only ones who had money. The serfs didn't, so the landowners were the ones who paid the money to support their government. This was imported into Pennsylvania in the early 1800s when we were an agrarian society. It was assumed that a farmer farming 40 acres of land was earning more than a farmer who was farming 10 acres, and he was taxed accordingly. But almost everybody earned their living from the land they live on. That's not true today. We simply live in our homes. They don't generate income for us, so why are our homes treated as if they're income generators? One of the basic principles of good taxation is that the tax should equal the person's ability to pay that tax. The property tax in no way has any relationship to a person's income or their ability to pay it, particularly for retired people who are on a fixed income and no longer see annual salary increases to meet increasing property taxes. Property taxes are inherently arbitrary and unfair. If you look at reassessments, you'll see just how unfair these are. The property tax assessment system is totally arbitrary. I'll use my own example. When our home was reassessed in 1989, we live in a cookie-cutter development. All the houses were built about the same time. The property sizes are the same. The homes are about the same square footage. Yet somehow the neighbor right next door to us was assessed at $25,000 less than we were. We appealed it and eventually got a small reduction, but the point of this is, because the property tax assessment system is so arbitrary, fairness is almost impossible. And in the recent Allegheny County reassessment, 83,000 homeowners appealed their assessment because they thought it was wrong. The inability to pay property taxes is another problem, and the loss of homes, which I already demonstrated with the piece from the Reading Eagle. Out of control spending by schools. I'm not one who likes to bash school boards. I think it's a thankless job and a lot of people work very hard. But on the other hand, there are those members of school boards who are there with agendas, and their agendas do not necessarily mesh with the agenda of the taxpayer or with the taxpayer's needs. We have members of school boards who serve as teachers in other school districts, or parents or spouses of teachers who serve on school boards in different districts. And the worst is the helicopter parents who get on school boards simply so they can make sure their child gets exactly what they want for them. And none of these people have the taxpayer in mind. This is part of the reason why we are seeing such a huge increase in property tax bills. Lack of effective education cost controls. Act 1 of 2006 supposedly put limits on the amount that school districts can raise property taxes each year, but it was a joke from the beginning, and even 2 years ago, when Act 1 was modified to only allow 3 exceptions to referendum on increases in property taxes, the 3 that remained were still the most common, and it's not unusual now to see increases of 4%, 5%, and 6% in property taxes, even when the stated limit is less than 2%. Education and taxation inequities. The Berwick School District in Columbia County is well subsidized by the state. Over the past 10 years, they've lost 1,000 students approximately, yet they're still funded 60% by the state because they'll never see a reduction in their funding. Now, if you switch that over to the York Suburban School District in York County, they've seen a huge influx of students over the past 10 years. They haven't seen any increase in their subsidy from the state, and because of that, 89% of their school budget is financed through local school property taxes. These are the inequities that exist in the system today, where a Columbia County school system can get by with 40% of their budget from the taxpayers, while 89% of the budget in York County is paid by the taxpayers. And of course, the projected cost of education, which we covered previously. The short answer to this is an irreparably broken K-12 public education finance system. Myth number 2, property tax relief or property tax reform is the solution. We've seen property tax reform, haven't we? We've seen property tax relief. Act 1 was supposed to give us relief from the gambling money in the state. I don't know about you. The relief on our home for the past 4 or 5 years since Act 1 went into effect has been about $131 a year against a $4,200 school property tax bill. This is not relief. It was never meant to be relief. Other examples of this are Act 50 and Act 72, which were enacted toward the end of the 1990s and the early 2000s, which gave local school districts the option of a partial shift from the property tax to a local earned income tax. The school boards rejected it in almost all school districts across the state. This was brought up again in 2006 with Act 1, where there was a mandated referendum where people in each school district could vote for a partial shift from property taxes to a local earned income tax. It was rejected in 494 of 498 eligible school districts. After the rejection, Governor Rendell said people were stupid for rejecting this form of property tax relief. No, they weren't stupid, they understood. A partial shift to a different tax, as long as property taxes are allowed to increase unabated, will eventually cause the same problems. As long as property taxes can continue to rise, they will eventually come back to their original level, and then you're still going to have another tax to pay on top of it. Local tax shifts for relief simply don't work. Same idea was the former HB 1600 tax shift that was introduced about 3 years ago. That called for a statewide relief plan with a 0.5 point increase in the sales tax, a 1/4 point increase in the income tax to give you about a $400 rebate. Same thing. Eventually, property taxes would have risen. That $400 got right back up to where they were, and you would have had 2 new taxes to pay on top of it. Any relief measure that does not fully cap property taxes is going to be quickly outstripped by rising school property taxes. It's a fake and always has been, and it's doomed to failure if the system is not restructured. And that's what we're talking about today. These are the 3 R's. No relief, no reform, no reduction. Replace the property tax. Eliminate it completely, drive a stake through it forever, relieve homeowners of this burden, and stop telling us you're going to give us property tax relief and property tax reform. This poor guy has been sitting like that for 30 years. And no wonder. We have heard more ideas for property tax relief and property tax reform in the past 30 years than you can shake a stick at. We have waited long enough. The legislators tell us that this is a complex issue and it's not easily resolved. I'm sorry. As far as I'm concerned, this is nothing but a whiny excuse to absolve them from taking effective action, and is totally untrue. They need the courage and the political will to ignore the special interests and their leadership and the partisan politics and do what is right for the taxpayers who elected them, period. Many legislators have said that taxpayers will not accept the kind of massive change that we're talking about. More than 60,000 members of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations and other supporters have told us that this is exactly what they want, and they will not object if other taxes are raised or broadened as long as they are fair and that the taxes they replace are totally eliminated. So why is now the time for change? Rising homeowner discontent. We've seen a huge upswell in grassroots support for this plan over the past couple of years. People are being stressed to the limit with property taxes. They've seen the increases. They're fearful. And with that kind of grassroots support, that's a really good reason to push this bill through. The failures from Act 50, Act 72, and Act 1, the tax relief, has people angry and upset. Quinnipiac University does polling in Pennsylvania on a regular basis. The last time they polled Pennsylvania on property taxes was in 2008. And we're talking 4 or 5 years ago. At that time, 89% of those polled said property tax reform was urgent. It was the #1 issue among Pennsylvania voters. And again, that was 4 to 5 years ago. So how bad is it now? The Allegheny County Court ruling, base year property tax assessment is unconstitutional. There was a ruling several years ago by Judge Stanton Weddick who said the property tax assessment system as it stands in Pennsylvania today is unconstitutional if reassessments aren't performed on a regular basis. If you want to go with the letter of Judge Weddick's decision, counties should be reassessed on average about every 2 to 3 years. That's not being done today, but again, as counties are being sued by their homeowners for reassessments, it's happening more and more often. What this amounts to is we're looking at a reassessment for each county every 2 to 3 years at an average cost of $10 million per reassessment per county. That's $10 million that are going to be taken out of your county property taxes to be able to conduct a reassessment that supposedly will fix a system that can't be fixed. Pressure from taxpayers groups in the media. 2 years ago, the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Association was 38 groups. Today, we're more than 70. We have grown our organization because people believe in what we're trying to do and believe in this cause to eliminate the property tax. And finally, and probably most importantly, is the diminishing opportunity to fund property tax replacement from a state-level source. There are only 2 state-level taxes that are capable of generating sufficient revenue to replace the school property tax, the income tax and the sales tax. When an earlier version of this plan was first formulated in 2004, we were looking at replacing about $8 billion annually in school property taxes. Today, almost 10 years later, that number has risen to $12.3 billion, a 50% increase in the taxes that have to be replaced. We are rapidly getting to the point where we can no longer raise the sales tax or the income tax enough to completely replace the school property tax. The need is urgent. This must be done now before school property taxes are allowed to go up any further. In June 2011, the American Legislative Exchange Council issued their Rich States, Poor States report for Pennsylvania. At that time, Pennsylvania was rated 46th in economic performance, 43rd in economic competitiveness, 41st in out-migration, people leaving the state. Main reason, according to Anthony Davies, who's an economics professor at Duquesne University, I'm going to read his quote here. He said, the out-migration problem is a symptom of rising property taxes, which, along with increased income taxes, affects where college graduates choose to move and live. They can go anywhere they want, so of course, the states that are going to attract them on average are the states with lower property taxes. Pennsylvania's future, its youth, its bright young minds are leaving the state in droves to avoid the property tax and the expense of owning property here. February 2012, the Tax Foundation issued its comparative analysis of state tax costs on businesses. The report for Pennsylvania, we are 49th of 50 for new firms. This is a measure of business friendliness. We are 49th of 50 for new firms and 50th of 50 for mature, established firms. Bottom line on this, runaway property taxes are destroying Pennsylvania's economy, devastating job-producing small business, and are driving away its residents. When I give this presentation live, I always ask folks if they know what the largest industry in Pennsylvania is. Think about it for a second. Pennsylvania's largest industry is farming, agriculture. And we're not talking about huge agribusinesses like Archer Daniels Midland. We're talking about small family farms that have been in families for generations. And as an example of what the property taxes are doing to family farms, about a year or so ago, I was giving this talk in Monroe County, and I ran into a woman whose father was a Christmas tree farmer. She told me that 10 years ago, he was farming 40 acres of Christmas trees. Today, he's farming 10. In the intervening 10 years, he has sold off 30 acres of his farm, piece by piece, to be able to afford the property taxes each year. We are devastating Pennsylvania's largest industry through runaway property taxes. What's the solution? Replace the school property tax with a more broad-based and equitable funding stream. The Property Tax Independence Act, House Bill 76 and Senate Bill 76. House Bill 76 was introduced by Representative Jim Cox, Senate Bill 76 by Senators David Argall, Mike Fulmer, John Udechak, and Judy Schwank. They're identical bills, and the Senate bill with those four co-sponsors actually is totally bipartisan with 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. This is the only proposal that is supported by the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations. So let's take a look at it. First of all, the goals. Total elimination of the school property tax. This will be done over a 2-year period. First year freezes the school property tax at its current level. Second year, total elimination of the school property tax with one exception that I'll get to in a moment. Total elimination of school boards' taxing ability, again with a specific exception, but school boards will never be able to levy property taxes again for the purpose of financing education. Stabilization of school funding. There are those who like to say the accepted wisdom is that the property tax is the most stable tax. It's just not true. Actually, over time, although there are annual fluctuations in the sales and income tax, over time, the sales and income tax has proven to be a much more stable revenue source. I'll give you a couple of examples. Exton Mall in Chester County appealed their assessment, $180,000 loss to the Chester School District. The Highlands, a nursing home in Wyomissing, appealed their assessment, $250,000 loss to the Wyomissing School District. Upper Merion School District in Montgomery County. In 2008, Upper Merion had an appeal by GlaxoSmithKline, a very large manufacturer, on their property tax assessment. It took 2 years going through the courts before it was finally settled, but in the end, it was settled in GlaxoSmithKline's favor. The Upper Merion School District lost $2 million a year in property tax revenue from a single appeal by a single manufacturer. What was worse, because it took 2 years to go through the appeals process, the Upper Merion School District was required to rebate $4 million to GlaxoSmithKline for the intervening 2 years while the appeal was pending. Stabilization of school funding is one of the primary goals of the Property Tax Independence Act, and because of what I've just told you, it accomplishes that goal. And establish realistic limits on K-12 education spending. I'll explain to you in a minute how that works. Some of the basic precepts of the plan. The elimination tax swap must be tax revenue neutral. First of all, the governor has taken the Americans for Tax Reform pledge that says he cannot increase taxes. This is a dollar-for-dollar swap from the property tax to sales and income taxes and doesn't raise $1 more than necessary. Good for two reasons. First of all, it's the fairest thing to do, but second, it gives the governor the ability to sign the bill when it reaches his desk. The bill is financed through a moderate expansion of the sales tax base to include more items and services with exemptions for necessities. Food is taxed, but only those items that are not on the WIC list. If you're not familiar with that, look it up on the web. It stands for Women, Infants, and Children, and it's a list of nutritionally sound items that you can buy in the store to feed your family that will not be subject to the sales tax. Clothing is taxed, but only individual items with a value of greater than $50 each. And most of the items you buy for everyday wear are well under $50. It also includes things like gum, candy, magazines, and haircuts. Now, there are exemptions. Food stamp purchases, all utilities, home heating fuels, tuition, all health care services, hospital and dental services, prescription drugs, and home health care are all exempt from the sales tax. There's an instinctive objection to some of these items like food and clothing, but let's look at the numbers for a second instead of going on gut instinct. Take your current school property tax bill, divide by 0.07, that's going to be the new sales tax rate, and that will tell you how much you have to spend on newly taxed items and services to equal your school property tax bill. Statewide average for school property tax is $3,500 a year. Divide that by 0.07, you'll find that you'll have to spend $50,000 a year on newly taxed items and services to equal that $3,500 school tax bill that was eliminated. Now, what are the chances of that happening? And you see, when you look at the numbers, some of the things that are going to be taxed anew are not as onerous as you might think. Sales tax also goes to 7% from the current 6%, and the state income tax goes from the current 3.07% to 4.34%. Those are the major funding streams for the replacement of the school property tax. The current gambling revenue that goes to property tax relief is also included, and some other small funding sources, but they're very minor compared to the three major ones I've just mentioned. Now, I mentioned earlier about a small retained property tax. Here's what that's all about. Long-term debt amounts to about $2.3 billion in debt service payments every year for all Pennsylvania school districts. To finance that long-term debt at the state level would have required the income tax in this plan to go to about 5%. That was politically not viable. The bill would have no chance of passage with an income tax rate of 5%. It was decided to leave the long-term debt payments with the individual school districts. It accomplishes two things. First of all, we do not have to find $2.3 billion at the state level. But second, in previous iterations of this plan, there were complaints from people in frugal school districts who said, why should I have to pay more taxes at the state level to finance the high-flying spenders at school districts who aren't as frugal? This accomplishes both things, keeps the debt from the state level and satisfies those people who do not want to pay for another school district's long-term debt. On average, 10% is the amount that is paid out of each school district's budget each year in debt service payments. This means that after enactment of HB 76 and SB 76, most homeowners will see their property taxes reduced by 90%, with the remaining 10% going away completely after the long-term debt is serviced. The school districts will have to declare any long-term debt on their books as of December 31st, 2012, and will not be able to finance any of the long-term debt or any other expenses for that matter with property taxes after that date. And the date is correct, December 31st, 2012, to avoid having the school districts load up on debt prior to the enactment of the Property Tax Independence Act. There are 23 school districts in the state that have no long-term debt and will see their property taxes completely eliminated in year 2. All property tax replacement revenue is to be placed in the Education Stabilization Fund, which is a segregated lockbox account. I know it's not perfect, but it's the best that could be done to separate this revenue from the general fund where it would be more easily spent. And any fund balance that accrues should not exceed 6% of the total property tax replacement funding. In the event that the balance exceeds 6% of the total needed, an automatic rate reduction in the income tax is mandated to keep the dollar-for-dollar equation in balance. Now, the replacement funding to the schools. All school districts will be funded dollar for dollar for the amount of property taxes eliminated. There is no redistribution of wealth. There's no funding formula. Whatever each school district loses in property taxes will be replaced 100% by the replacement revenue from the state. Annual funding increases, and this is the cost controls built into this legislation. Annual funding increases to all districts is going to be based either on the increase in the Consumer Price Index, which is a measure of inflation, or available revenue, whichever is less, allocated to each district on a percentage basis. This keeps school district funding at pace with the level of inflation. And because it is either the increase in the CPI or the increase in the available revenue, there should never be a need to increase either the income tax or the sales tax again for education funding. I mentioned that there is one taxing ability left for local school boards. Can't leave the local school boards twisting in the wind. They're going to have legitimate needs for extra funding. And this is addressed in the Property Tax Independence Act. Supplemental local school funding through an earned income tax or a personal income tax. School board can enact either one of those, but subject to a no exception referendum. If it's used for a specific project, let's say a new stadium, a new roof, a new school, it must state the purpose of the project, the cost of the project, the tax rate to be applied, and a sunset date for the tax. This is all explained to the taxpayers. If the school board can make their case and the taxpayers approve it by referendum, the tax can be enacted, but in no other way. If the school district needs it for general purpose funding, that's okay too. But the referendum has to be renewed every 4 years to allow that tax to continue. This legislation, HB 76 and SB 76, is implemented for the replacement of local school district property taxes only and is not to be integrated in any way with the current basic education subsidy. That funding will continue in whatever form is determined by the General Assembly. Previous versions of the plan look to completely rework the funding formula from the ground up. Very difficult prospect to do, a lot of contention, and we figured for this legislation it's best to allow it only for replacement of school property taxes and allow the basic education funding formula to continue as is. There will also be introduction of separate concurrent legislation proposing a constitutional amendment to forever forbid the property tax from being used as a school funding source. The Independent Fiscal Office was established a couple of years ago to do analyses of legislation for the legislators so they could better understand the ramifications of what they are doing. The IFO did an analysis of the Property Tax Independence Act that was released on September 21st, 2012, and besides the numbers contained therein, they also gave some comments, and here's a few of them. The elimination of school property taxes increases the disposable income of property taxpayers. The analysis assumes that 70% of the property tax cut goes to individuals. It further assumes that homeowners spend 90% of the increase in disposable income, which helps to stimulate Pennsylvania's economy. The analysis indicates that the legislation will cause home values to increase on average by more than 10% statewide, restoring a lot of the value that was lost during the 2008 housing downturn. Working-age homeowners realize a tax cut. The analysis found that the increase in federal income tax, because you no longer have the property tax to deduct on federal income tax, state income tax and sales tax is more than offset by the reduction in the property taxes. The IFO also said that retired homeowners realize a significant reduction in taxes. The analysis found that the property tax reduction easily offsets any increase from the higher sales tax. The elimination of property taxes would significantly reduce the property tax share and would clearly increase the attractiveness of the Commonwealth for business, location, and expansion. Instead of driving businesses out of the state like we do right now, we could turn this state into an economic powerhouse. I don't know how many of you have heard of KOZs. Stands for Keystone Opportunity Zone. Targeted tax breaks for specific industries or businesses to try to attract them to Pennsylvania. The one most familiar to me is Cabela's in Hamburg that was given a 10-year property tax abatement to attract them here, and they came, and huge developments surrounded them. On the other hand, KOZ status was granted to EA Games in Chester County about 15 years ago. That was a 10-year property tax abatement, and 10 years to the day when that abatement expired, EA Games left Chester County. The point of this is, we allow our politicians to pick and choose the winners and the losers by granting KOZ status. Why not turn the entire state into a Keystone Opportunity Zone by eliminating the school property taxes, throw our doors open, and welcome businesses here no matter where they want to locate, generate jobs for Pennsylvania, and boost Pennsylvania's economy? The study also said that benefits would accrue to home builders, home developers, and other landowners who convert current holdings into new housing plots. That would increase employment in the construction sector as well. And regarding business entities, the report said the income flows through to individuals as higher disposable income. For pass-through entities, the analysis assumes that owners and shareholders spend 90% of the increase, and 70% of that is spent on taxable goods and services, yielding a secondary effect of $34 million in increased sales taxes for fiscal year 2013-14. $34 million in increased sales taxes, which means more money for education. The most important part of HB 76 and SB 76 is that it is the people's bill. Representative Cox, in working with the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Association, was fully collaborative with us, with our groups, in crafting this legislation. Pennsylvania, unlike many other states, has no taxpayer initiative and referendum, and this is as close as you're going to get. Every aspect of this bill was approved by the groups in the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations. Our input was used in crafting the bill, and we approved every part of this bill. This is why the bill has such enthusiastic support in Pennsylvania. It is our bill, the people's legislation. We support it, we're working for it, and what's amazing about this is gridlock in Harrisburg, gridlock in Washington. The parties can't agree on anything. We are more than 70 diverse groups that span the entire political spectrum, and we were able to come together on this plan and accomplish what Washington and Harrisburg has been unable to do. A realistic, common-sense solution that satisfies everybody concerned and benefits the people and school children of Pennsylvania. Most of all, the Property Tax Independence Act is a clean bill. We were involved in this from the get-go, and this bill benefits no special interests in any way, unlike most Harrisburg legislation. And we're going to see a lot of opposition to this legislation because of that, because certain industries, certain people, certain businesses, certain special interests are not getting the perks they normally would receive in legislation. This is a clean piece of legislation, something very unusual for Pennsylvania taxpayers and legislators. A couple of common objections. People who oppose the bill say the numbers don't work. Well, the independent fiscal analysis said that the version that was introduced in 2011 and 2012 came up $1.5 billion short. Those numbers have been adjusted according to the IFO numbers to make sure the bill is absolutely in balance for the 2013-2014 session. Any legislator who says the numbers don't work is using this as an excuse to not support the legislation, and it's just not true. Loss of local control. The only loss of local control is the ability of school districts to levy a property tax without approval. School districts are free to use the money in any way they please. There are no mandates attached to the money. The only loss a school district has is the ability to levy taxes at will, period. The objection to we shouldn't tax clothing or books or flags or whatever, I've already covered that. Divide your property tax by 0.07, see if it really matters. And the plan shouldn't eliminate for businesses. Two reasons it should. First of all, the uniformity clause of the Pennsylvania Constitution says you cannot have different taxation rates for entities within the same taxing body. You can't keep taxing the businesses while eliminating property taxes for homeowners. That would require a constitutional amendment, a minimum 2-year process that requires a voter referendum and has no guarantee of results. We cannot afford to waste time on something that uncertain. The need is too urgent now. But besides that, We've already covered why this is good for Pennsylvania, good for business, and good for bringing jobs to the state. Most definitely, we should eliminate for businesses, and anyone using that excuse is not being truthful. So very quickly, here's 10 reasons to eliminate school property taxes and enact the Property Tax Independence Act. First of all, achieve true home ownership. You never really own your home as long as it can be taken from you for non-payment of property taxes. Now, this doesn't do it completely because the county and municipal taxes still remain, but this takes care of 2/3 of an annual property tax bill, and the next thing we work on is getting rid of county and municipal. Stabilize school funding. Already told you all about that. Help prevent foreclosures. People have said to me that people have bought too much house, they can't afford it. Well, if they're foreclosed, they deserve it. That's just not right. Every time there's a foreclosure, yes, the person who's being foreclosed on may or may not deserve it, but it hurts the community, it hurts the neighborhood, and hurts the economy. Get rid of the largest part of the monthly property tax escrow, the school property tax, which in some areas can equal the mortgage payment, and watch how many homes can be saved in Pennsylvania just by simply eliminating the school property tax. Restore plummeting real estate values. In Monroe County in the Poconos along the New Jersey border, a home built 5 years ago that cost $250,000 today is worth only about $150,000 because of the property tax load. A home for sale in Monroe County today at $200,000, which is the statewide median for home sales. A home for sale at $200,000 in Monroe County, it is not unusual for it to have a $10,000 a year property tax load. You can't give houses away in Monroe County. The housing market has crashed because of it. There are more than 3,000 unoccupied homes in Monroe County who were walkaways. People just couldn't afford to keep them anymore, walked away from them, and they're generating no property tax, which makes it even tougher on the remaining homeowners. Boost the sagging housing market. Individual realtors have told us, get rid of the monthly property tax escrow and watch the Pennsylvania housing market explode. Young people who right now cannot afford that piece of the American dream because of the monthly property tax escrow suddenly will be able to afford to buy a home when they no longer have to worry about a $300 or $400 or $500 monthly property tax escrow payment. Attract businesses to Pennsylvania. We've already discussed that. Generate jobs for Pennsylvanians. If you bring businesses to Pennsylvania, the jobs follow. Create a massive stimulus for Pennsylvania. We're talking about releasing $12.3 billion back into Pennsylvania's economy. 90% of that spent. What a huge boost for Pennsylvania's economy. It can make us the economic powerhouse of the Northeast. Increase personal wealth. Probably your most valuable asset is your home. With home values going back up, this gives you the opportunity to increase your wealth through the increase in your property value. But besides that, with the money you're not paying in school property taxes each month, you can afford to save more toward your retirement, toward your child's education, but it's an overall increase in personal wealth. And finally, stop costly reassessments. Not totally, again, because the county and municipal property taxes remain, but in most cases, reassessments are forced by school districts looking to gain more revenue. And this may give huge inroads into ending regular reassessments. Often when I give this talk, people say to me, oh, I hope that they'll do something about it. Or good luck, I hope you can do it. They, meaning the legislators. This is a grassroots movement. Left to the legislators alone, this is never going to happen. This needs to be pushed from the bottom up, not the top down, which means citizen participation, grassroots participation, calling your legislators, demanding that they support this legislation and make sure it passes. And good luck, I hope you can do it. I can't do anything. We need you, everyone, to get involved in this movement and help us. Take a look at the PTCC website, read more about this. Take a look at some of the things you can do to help spread the word and engage your neighbors and your friends and your family in this movement. True education finance reform can be achieved with your help. This cartoon was published in the Pottstown Mercury last year prior to a rally we held in the Capitol Rotunda. Gave enough attention to the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations bringing their grievances to both the legislature and to Governor Corbett. We must continue to do that if we are going to get this bill enacted, and we need your help to get it done. There's the web address, www.ptcc.us. Again, www.ptcc.us. Take a look at the website while you're there. Subscribe to the free email updates to keep you informed on what is happening with the legislation and how you can help. Read the information, tell your friends and neighbors about it, send them to the website. We also have a very active Facebook page. Simply do a search for PTCC or Pennsylvania Taxpayers Cyber Coalition and join us. As of the date of this taping, we're currently at about 1,600 members in a very active discussion group on Facebook. We'd love to have you along. That's the presentation. If you have any questions, please send them to me at the email address listed on the PTCC website. And thank you for your attention.